So in this lesson, we're going to automate product research for our new tracksuit idea. Instead of manually needing to search for the top selling tracksuits in the USA so we can do some research on them, we're going to use an API to fetch some relevant data. So an overview of the workflow. For this workflow, we're going from product research to an email. Why we use it to automate the gathering of product market data and deliver structured information and research about our product. And common other uses for this are not only product research, but also you can use it for competitor analysis, tracking sales across the internet, and monitoring trends across the internet. So the scenario is we're automating tracksuit product research. What we're going to do is let the API do the work and automate the reporting process. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's a way for one piece of software to communicate with another. So unlike the nodes in N8N, APIs can expose properties that are sometimes not in those nodes. So let's have a look and let's create a workflow. So here we can see there are two different workflows. I've actually placed them side by side just so that we can see them. The first one, once we click execute, it's going to do a search using this node. This is a Tavily node. And so we've inserted that, and then it will take the output from that. It's going to run a little bit of code just to format the results into HTML. And then it's going to send an email message to the product team or to the product manager or product owner so that they've got some research done for them based on this search. So let's have a look at the kind of email that we would get. So if I go to my email, you can see an example of the kind of email we would get. It says, "Hey product team, here are your latest results for top 10 most popular tracksuits in the USA." It says top 10, but actually it's returning the best 7 tracksuits for men according to Esquire magazine. And it's got some images of different types of tracksuits that have come back in the search. And while this isn't an extensive email, this is just the first start really at how we can get back some kind of information that relates to our product that we can call research, that we can then delve deeper if we want to. So this is the kind of email we get back. And that's an example of what we're going to create today. So looking back at the canvas, there are 2 ways to do it. This does it via the node, the search node, which is provided by Tavily. And this does it via the API. And as you can see already, there's one major difference, which is that this uses what's called a HTTP request to go off and get the information. And that's going to be using the API. So let's get into it. I'm going to do it in both ways, and then I'm going to explain why we would do it in each way and how it's done. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to click create workflow. And in here, the first step is we're going to do this using Tavily's node. So if we go and we click here, we can actually search for Tavily. And in here, we're going to find the action that we need. So the first action we need is the search action. So we'll click on that. And this is what's going to allow us to search on Tavily. Now, before you are able to run this, you're going to need some kind of credentials. And the way you do that is on Tavily's website. So if we go over, so here I am at tavily.com. And what you want to do is, first of all, you can find out all the information about APIs and things like that on this website. If you click on docs and you go to API reference, here it is. But what you really want to do is once you're here, you want to be able to log on as someone and sign up as someone who can this API. So to make sure you've got the correct type of account, I recommend, even though you could create an account on the homepage, just go to get an API key. And then that will allow you to sign up here. And that just makes sure that you can sign up. I actually signed up with Google, and that's that really. Once you've done that, you want to go to app.tavily.com and you'll end up on the homepage here. And then right here on the homepage, you'll see here it says API keys. If you don't have one, just click the plus button and then give it a name. And it's correct that it's a development one, and click create. I've already done that, so I won't do that now. But once you've done it, you will get an API key here that you can copy, and you can head back then to N8N. And then when you come in here, you can create your new credential, and it will ask you to put your API key in here. You can just paste that straight in. like that, and click save. And then once you've done that, you can just close the window. I'm not saving mine, I've already done it. So then you'll be back at this screen, and you want to make sure that the resource is search, which it will be because we chose it earlier. The operation is query, and there's nothing else you need to do there. So at this point, what it allows us to do is run a particular type of search. So let's test this out and make sure we can run a search. Now, one of the benefits of using Tavily is it's optimized for AI agents. It's optimized for the exact kind of purpose, what we're using it for. And it uses AI in the background to do more powerful searches than you could get from the Google API. So I'm about to put in a query, and it's going to give me very much a specific result. It's not going to give me a list of pages or anything to choose from. It may give me a page, but it will give me more specific results. So let's grab my query and paste that in. So I'm going to start with quite a vague query just to demonstrate the point. So this is a very open question. What are the top most popular tracksuits in the USA? And let's execute that step. So you can see we've received some output. You can see it as schema, which I think is a little bit clearer. You can see it as a table, or you can see it as JSON. But in either case, what we've got back is we've got back just some results here. And the results are consisting of some links to some various websites. So you can see we've got adidas.com, bestsellers tracksuit. We've got gq.com, the best tracksuits. And we've got farfetch.com. So we've got a whole bunch of different links to different places in this format, which is a format that we could then put in an email. So from here, what we want to see is actually some images. And the way we do that is there are options down here that we can pick. Include images is one of those. And we set that to true. So if we now execute the step, we can see here we have a number of different images. And so now what we can do is we can see images. If I open this in a different tab, images for our research that show us what some of the best tracksuits are. If we now go back, we may ask, how does this relate to APIs? So in the background, Tavily is actually using an application programming interface. In fact, all of the nodes in N8N are using application programming interfaces to talk to code. And what N8N does is it wraps them in a node. But that requires Tavily to actually do what they need to do to allow N8N to create their nodes. So in fact, there are some companies that don't have nodes available in N8N. Now, in this case, we do have a node available, but I'm doing this to show you how you can get around it if you don't. So let's say there wasn't a node for Tavily. How would we still fetch this information and send it to an email? Well, if we close this and go back to Tavily's website, all will become clear. So if we go back to the home page, what we want to do is we want to click on documentation. Now, documentation here gives us a link to the API reference. And the API reference will show us actually what N8N is doing to wrap the API. So the application programming interface is actually sending requests back and forth, usually in JSON format. What you can see here is these are the different APIs. One of them is search, extract, crawl, map, and they all have different purposes. But we are using search in this case just to demonstrate the idea. And if you look down here, you can see here are the various properties within the search. So we've got authorizations that allows us to authorize, and that's where our API key goes to show that we actually have the authority to request information. So when we logged in, we created our API key for that reason. We've got the body, which has, in this example, the actual query string. And here they've put in who is Leo Messi. And it has various other things like auto parameters, topic, search depth. And if you remember, we even said include images, and we did that in the node. So let's look side by side with N8N so we can compare the API to what we did in N8N. So on our left, we have our API documentation. So this is how behind the scenes N8N is talking to Tavily to get the information. And on our right, we have N8N, and we have our node open, our Tavily node open. And if you look closely, we're sending a query, and down the bottom are various options. And search depth is one of them. And if we were to look here, we can see here search depth is also an option here. Another example, as I stated before, we looked for include images was one of the options here, and include images is also one of the options here. So what we can very quickly see is using the API, we can do the same things that are available in the node. Now, why would we use an API if we do have a node? Well, one of the things that you'll see is that if we open up options and we look through this list of options that we have, and then we flick back to this side, you'll see that one of the things we can search by here is topic, and topic is the category of the search. News is useful for retrieving real-time updates, particularly about politics, sports, and major current events covered by mainstream media sources. General is for broader, more general purpose searches that may include a wide range of sources. So as you can see, sometimes there are options that are available here that aren't available in here. And so if you want either greater control, which has nothing to do with the options, but just greater control over what you're doing, or you want to grab specific options that are available within the API that are not exposed in the node, that's why you'd use an API. Now, today we may or may not be doing that, but at least we know that if we ever wanted to do more, we could use the API call to do that. So now let's do exactly what we're doing with the node, but instead of using a node to search, let's use an API call to do that. So now we're back in the canvas. What we're going to do is we'll leave this in place, but instead of using a search node, now we're going to use an HTTP request node. And this is the node that we use to make a request from an API, and then we get back a response for our search. So first of all, as usual, click the plus, HTTP request. A very easy way to do our setup is to use this curl. And by importing the curl, it's like a command line URL. What we're going to do is we're going to actually import all of the correct settings that we're going to use in our HTTP request. So if we head back to the API documentation, so what we want to do is, if you look on the right hand side, you can see there are various options, Python, JavaScript, and there's our curl. So if we click on that, click copy, what this will do is it will essentially run a command within N8N that will set up our node for us. And it will mean that we don't need to fill in and do all of the setup to set up the node correctly so that it can make the request for the search. So if we head back to N8N, then what we want to do is click import and paste in exactly what we got and click import. So now we can see that's completely set up. So what this does is it set the method for us to post. It's calling the correct API, which is search. It's saying we don't need authentication here, at least. It said send headers, and it's saying what to send in those headers to the code. And it's saying which fields to use. So the first field it's using, and the only field it's using actually, is authorization, an authorization field. And the bearer will have our API key in it, which is what authorizes it and means we can use it. So now if we head back over, we want to go to get our API key. So we've headed back to our home page, and we can click copy, head back to N8N, and where it says token, we just replace that with the API key. And now this will be authorized, and it will know that we have an account and we're authorized to get the information we want. Down here where it says send body, this is in JSON format, and this is what it's going to send over to the endpoint, to the API endpoint. And all of these parameters tell it how to run our query. So first of all, let's change the query to exactly the same thing we had in our node. And we don't want that there, so detach that, as this is going to run separately. So we'll open that up and we'll copy, go back to our HTTP request. And at the moment, we'll just hard code it in. It's best practice to have a parameter and pass that in, but we're just going to hard code that in for now. So there's our question. And that's pretty much all we need. There are no other options we need to include at this point. Let's just execute that step. There you go. So now we've got our results just like before. And again, no images. So what we want to do is, if we look through here, we can see that there are various options. And these are the equivalent of what we set up in our node. If you remember, we flicked the switch that said include images. The equivalent of doing that in code is obviously setting this from false to true. So let's do that and execute again. And now we see up here, we've got images returned. And if we just take a sneak peek, right click, go open a new window, you can see there's a bunch of images. So related to our results, we've got now some images for research purposes for some of the most popular tracksuits, according to what Tavali has found on the internet.